The sun hung high in the Lagos sky, casting a golden glow over the sprawling event center where Jane and Samuel's wedding was taking place. The air buzzed with excitement, the rhythmic beat of Afrobeat music mingling with the laughter and chatter of guests. The venue was a spectacle of color and opulence, adorned with vibrant aso-oke fabrics, fresh palm fronds, and towering floral arrangements in shades of gold and crimson. It was the wedding of the year, a celebration of love that had drawn family, friends, and even a few Nollywood celebrities. Jane stood at the center of it all, a vision of grace and beauty. Her gele, intricately tied, sat regally atop her head, and her lace iro and buba shimmered under the sunlight. Her smile was radiant, her eyes sparkling with joy as she held Samuel's hand. Samuel, tall and handsome in his crisp Agbada, looked every bit the proud groom, his love for Jane evident in the way he gazed at her. Together, they were the picture of perfection, a couple so deeply in love that their happiness seemed to infect everyone around them. The ceremony had been a beautiful blend of tradition and modernity. Under a canopy adorned with gold and white fabrics, Jane and Samuel had exchanged vows, their voices trembling with emotion as they promised to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. The officiant, a respected elder in the community, had blessed their union, and the guests had erupted into cheers and applause. The traditional rites had followed, with the breaking of kola nuts, the sharing of palm wine, and the lively dancing that accompanied the Yoruba wedding songs. It was a day filled with joy, a celebration of not just two people, but two families coming together. As the reception began, the atmosphere shifted from solemnity to celebration. The event hall was a sight to behold, with long tables draped in gold cloth and centerpieces of fresh flowers. A live band played upbeat high-life music, and the dance floor quickly filled with guests, their colorful outfits swirling as they moved to the rhythm. The air was thick with the aroma of jollof rice, peppered goat meat, and fried plantains, served in abundance to the delight of everyone present. At the center of the room stood the wedding cake, a towering masterpiece that drew gasps of admiration from the guests. The cake, a fusion of traditional and modern design, was adorned with intricate lace-like patterns and topped with a figurine of the couple. It was a symbol of their union, a sweet promise of the life they would build together. Jane and Samuel, hand in hand, approached the cake amidst cheers and applause. They exchanged a playful glance before cutting the first slice together, their smiles wide and carefree. The guests watched as they each took a bite, their eyes locked in a moment of shared happiness. But then, something went terribly wrong. Jane's smile faltered, her hand flying to her throat as if she couldn't breathe. Samuel's eyes widened in alarm, and he reached for her, but before he could steady her, he too staggered, clutching his chest. The laughter and music came to an abrupt halt as the couple collapsed on the dance floor, their bodies crumpling in a heap of lace and Agbada. Gasps and screams erupted from the crowd. The joyous atmosphere shattered, replaced by a chilling sense of dread. Guests rushed forward, their faces pale with shock, as someone shouted for a doctor. The band stopped playing, the silence that followed deafening. Children clung to their parents, and elders muttered prayers under their breath. The once beautiful celebration had turned into a nightmare, the air thick with grief and confusion. Paramedics arrived within minutes, their sirens wailing in the distance. They pushed through the crowd, their movements urgent and precise. But despite their efforts, it was too late. Jane and Samuel lay motionless, their hands still loosely intertwined, their faces frozen in expressions of surprise. The room was plunged into chaos. Some guests wept openly, while others stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what had just happened. As the paramedics covered the couple with a sheet, a hushed whisper spread through the crowd: poison. The cake, the symbol of their love, had become the instrument of their demise. Questions swirled: who could have done such a thing? And why? The grand celebration had ended in tragedy, leaving behind a legacy of love cut short and a mystery that would haunt everyone who had witnessed it. The guests, once filled with joy, now carried the weight of sorrow, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that something beautiful had been irrevocably destroyed. And as the lights dimmed and the event center fell into an uneasy silence, the question lingered in the air, unanswered and unsettling: who would want to kill Jane and Samoa on the happiest day of their lives? The morning after the tragedy, Detective Mike arrived at the event center, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. The once vibrant venue now felt like a ghost town. The colorful decorations, scattered chairs, deflated balloons, and wilting flowers stood in stark contrast to the chaos of the previous night. The air was heavy with the lingering scent of food and flowers, but the joy that had once filled the space was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. Mike, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving even the most perplexing cases, knew this one would be different. The high-profile nature of the victims, the opulence of the event, and the sheer audacity of the crime meant the pressure to solve it would be immense. He adjusted his hat, took a deep breath, and began his walk. His first stop was the reception hall, where the wedding cake still stood, now cordoned off with police tape. The forensic team had already collected samples, and Mike studied the cake with a practiced eye. It was a masterpiece, its intricate designs now marred by the tragedy it had caused. He made a mental note to interview the baker and catering team. They were the most obvious suspects. The baker, a middle-aged woman named Mama Ada, was visibly shaken when Mike questioned her. She had been in the business for over 2 decades and had a reputation for excellence. "I swear on my mother's grave, I didn't do anything to that cake," she insisted, her voice trembling. "I prepared it with my own hands, just like I've done for hundreds of weddings. I would never harm anyone." Her staff echoed her statements, their alibis checked out, and there was no clear motive. Still, Mike made a note to dig deeper into their backgrounds. In his experience, even the most innocent-seeming individuals could harbor secrets. Next, Mike turned his attention to the couple's inner circle. He started with Jane's older sister, Doris, who had been one of the first to rush to the couple's side when they collapsed. Doris was elegant and composed, but Mike noticed a flicker of unease in her eyes. She admitted that she had been envious of Jane's seemingly perfect life but quickly dismissed the idea that she would ever harm her sister. "I loved her," Doris said, her voice breaking. "I would never do anything to hurt her." Samoa's family proved to be equally complex. His younger brother, Francis, revealed that Samoa had recently cut him out of a lucrative business deal, leaving him resentful. "He always thought he was better than me," Francis muttered, though he denied any involvement in the poisoning. Mike made a mental note to explore the family's financial records. Money, he knew, was often a powerful motive. As the interviews continued, a pattern began to emerge. Jane's best friend, Rose, had been a constant presence in her life. She was the friend who had celebrated Jane's successes, comforted her during her struggles, and even helped plan the wedding. But what no one knew, not even Jane, was that Rose had harbored a secret love for Samoa for years. It was a love she had buried deep, knowing it could never be reciprocated. Or so she had thought. Mike's suspicions were first piqued when he noticed Rose's behavior during his initial interviews. She had been overly eager to deflect attention from herself, steering the conversation toward Doris and her known resentment toward Samoa. At the time, Mike had dismissed it as grief, but now, with the growing complexity of the case, Rose's actions took on a more sinister tone. A breakthrough came later that day when the forensic team delivered their preliminary findings. The lab results confirmed what everyone had suspected: Jane and Samoa had been poisoned. The toxin, a fast-acting and lethal substance, had been laced into the cake's frosting. Mike's jaw tightened as he studied the report. This was no accident, it was a deliberate act of murder. With this confirmation, Mike knew the investigation was just beginning. The cake had been the weapon, but the motive and the killer remained elusive. As he left the event center that evening, the weight of the case settled on his shoulders. Jane and Samuel's love story had ended in tragedy, and Mike owed it to them, and to their grieving families, to uncover who had destroyed their happiness. The hunt for the truth was on, and Mike was determined to follow it to the end, no matter where it led. Detective Mike's investigation took him deeper into the lives of Jane and Samuel, revealing a tangled web of hidden tensions and rivalries. What had initially seemed like a straightforward case of poisoning was now unraveling into something far more complex. The more Mike dug, the more he realized that the couple's seemingly perfect lives had been built on a foundation of secrets. The first major breakthrough came when Mike uncovered Doris's past relationship with Samuel. Jane's older sister had been discreetly present at the wedding, blending seamlessly into the crowd of guests. At first glance, she appeared to be the picture of composure, offering tearful condolences and reminiscing about her sister's kindness. But as Mike dug deeper, he discovered a far more complicated story. Doris and Samuel had been in a serious relationship years ago, one that ended abruptly when Samuel met Jane. Friends and acquaintances described the breakup as tumultuous, with Doris struggling to move on. She was devastated, one mutual friend revealed. She never really got over him. Mike's suspicions grew when he found a hidden letter among Samuel's belongings. It was tucked away in a drawer in his home office, written in Doris's elegant handwriting. The letter was dated just a few weeks before the wedding and hinted at a recent meeting between Samuel and Doris. "I can't stop thinking about our conversation," the letter read. "You said you still cared about me. What does that mean for us now?" The tone was intimate, almost pleading, and it raised troubling questions. Had Samuel been unfaithful to Jane? Or was Doris clinging to a hope that no longer existed? Mike brought Doris in for questioning. She was calm at first, her demeanor polished and controlled, but as the interrogation progressed, cracks began to show. She admitted to meeting Samuel but insisted it was innocent. "We were just catching up," she said, her voice steady. "I had no ill intentions. I loved my sister. I would never hurt her." Mike wasn't convinced. Doris's resentment toward Samuel was palpable, and her alibi for the time of the poisoning was shaky at best. Meanwhile, Mike turned his attention to Rose, Jane's best friend. On the surface, Rose had been the picture of loyalty, standing by Jane's side through every milestone, including her wedding. But as Mike began to peel back the layers, he discovered that Rose's devotion to Jane masked a far more complicated and dangerous reality. Rose had secretly loved Samuel for years, a love she had buried deep, knowing it could never be reciprocated. Or so she had thought. Mike's suspicions were first piqued when he noticed Rose's behavior during his initial interviews. She had been overly eager to deflect attention from herself, steering the conversation toward Doris and her known resentment toward Samuel. At the time, Mike had dismissed it as grief, but now, with the growing complexity of the case, Rose's actions took on a more sinister tone. A deeper dive into Rose's background revealed a troubling connection to Doris. The two women had been in contact for months, their relationship far closer than anyone had realized. Phone records obtained by Mike's team showed a series of cryptic messages exchanged between Doris and Rose on the day of the wedding. The texts were vague but ominous, with phrases like, "It's almost time," and "Don't back out now." Mike's gut told him these messages were the key to unraveling the final piece of the puzzle. Confronted with the evidence, Doris broke down further. She admitted to lacing the cake with poison but insisted that Rose had been the mastermind behind the plan. "She's the one who convinced me to do it," Doris confessed, her voice trembling. She said it was the only way to make Samuel see what he'd lost. "She promised me it would just make them sick, that no one would get hurt. I didn't know it would kill them." Mike's mind raced as he processed Doris's words. Rose had manipulated Doris, exploiting her bitterness and heartbreak to orchestrate the poisoning. But why? What did Rose stand to gain from Jane and Samuel's deaths? The answer, Mike realized, lay in Rose's unrequited love for Samuel. In her twisted mind, eliminating Jane had been the only way to free Samuel from a life she believed he didn't truly want. And with Jane gone, Rose had likely hoped to step into the void, offering Samuel the comfort and love she had always longed to give him. But before Mike could bring Rose in for questioning, she vanished. Her apartment was empty, her phone disconnected, and her social media accounts deactivated. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. The discovery sent a wave of urgency through the investigation. Rose was no longer just a suspect, she was a fugitive, and every passing moment increased the risk that she would slip away for good. The case had taken a dark turn, and Mike was determined to follow it to the end, no matter where it led. Jane and Samuel's love story had been cut short by betrayal, and Mike owed it to them to ensure that justice was served, no matter how many lies he had to untangle along the way. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on Dorissa's face. She sat across from Detective Mike, her hands clasped tightly on the table. Mike had been relentless in his questioning, and the pressure was beginning to wear her down. Her composure, once unshakable, was now crumbling under the weight of the evidence against her. "Doris," Mike began, his voice calm but firm, "we know you were involved. The poison in the cake, the letter to Samuel, the messages with Rose, it's all pointing to you. Tell me the truth. What happened?" Dorissa's shoulders slumped, and she let out a shuddering breath. Tears welled up in her eyes as she finally broke. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to hurt them, to make them feel the pain I felt. But I never thought they'd die." Mike leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Start from the beginning." Doris confessed to lacing the cake with poison but insisted that Rose had been the mastermind behind the plan. "She's the one who convinced me to do it," Doris said, her voice cracking. "She said it was the only way to make Samuel see what he'd lost. She promised me it would just make them sick, that no one would get hurt. I didn't know it would kill them." Mike's mind raced as he processed her words. Rose had manipulated Doris, exploiting her bitterness and heartbreak to orchestrate the poisoning. But why? What did Rose stand to gain from Jane and Samuel's deaths? The answer, Mike realized, lay in Rose's unrequited love for Samuel. In her twisted mind, eliminating Jane had been the only way to free Samuel from a life she believed he didn't truly want. And with Jane gone, Rose had likely hoped to step into the void, offering Samuel the comfort and love she had always longed to give him. Mike's team moved quickly to tighten the net around Rose. They searched her apartment and found traces of the same poison used in the cake, further implicating her. But when they arrived to arrest her, Rose was gone. Her apartment was empty, her phone disconnected, and her social media accounts deactivated. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The discovery sent a wave of urgency through the investigation. Rose was no longer just a suspect, she was a fugitive, and every passing moment increased the risk that she would slip away for good. Mike knew they had to act fast. He coordinated a citywide manhunt, deploying officers to track Rose's movements through surveillance footage, credit card transactions, and eyewitness accounts. As the search intensified, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that Rose's disappearance was more than just an attempt to evade capture. It was a final act of control, a way to ensure that she remained at the center of the story. In her mind, she had already won, Samuel was free, even if it was in death, and Jane was out of the picture. But Mike was determined to bring her to justice, no matter where she hid. The story shifted to Rose's perspective as she fled Lagos, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. She had planned for this moment, withdrawing a large sum of cash from her bank account and packing a bag with essentials. Disguised in a simple wrapper and headscarf, she blended into the bustling streets of the city, her movements deliberate and calculated. As she boarded a bus heading out of Lagos, Rose's mind raced with thoughts of Samuel. She had loved him for years, silently watching as he fell for Jane. In her twisted mind, Jane had stolen her happiness, and the wedding had been the final blow. She didn't deserve him, Rose muttered to herself, her grip tightening on the bag in her lap. I was the one who understood him. I was the one who loved him. Meanwhile, Mike and his team were closing in. A tip from a bus station attendant led them to Rose's trail. She had purchased a ticket to a remote town outside Lagos, and Mike knew they had to move quickly. He assembled a team and set off in pursuit, the urgency of the situation driving them forward. The chase culminated in a tense confrontation at a small, run-down motel on the outskirts of the town. Mike and his team surrounded the building, their movements swift and precise. When they burst into Rose's room, they found her sitting calmly on the bed, her expression eerily serene. "It's over, Rose," Mike said, his voice steady. "You're under arrest." Rose looked up at him, her eyes cold and unrepentant. "You don't understand," she said, her voice dripping with bitterness. "Jane stole everything from me. She stole Samuel. She stole my happiness. I had to take it back." Mike's jaw tightened as he listened to her chilling monologue. Rose showed no remorse, her twisted logic justifying her actions. "Love makes you do things you never thought you were capable of," she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I did what I had to do." As Mike handcuffed her and led her away, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Rose's warped sense of love and justice was a stark reminder of how easily emotions could be twisted into something deadly. The case had taken him to the darkest corners of human emotion, and he knew it would haunt him for a long time. Back in Lagos, the community mourned Jane and Samuel, their love story cut short by betrayal. The truth brought a measure of closure, but the scars of the tragedy would remain. Mike stood at the edge of the event center, now empty and silent, and reflected on the case. Love, jealousy, and betrayal had collided in the most devastating way, leaving behind a legacy of pain and loss. As he walked away, Mike vowed to continue fighting for justice, no matter how dark the path. Jane and Samuel's story had ended in tragedy, but their memory would live on, a reminder of the destructive power of envy and the importance of seeking the truth.